So the following is a variety of literary devices that authors use in poetry, in short stories, in novels. Literary devices can even be seen in nonfiction. So you want to make sure that you're familiar with all of these devices and are able to identify them in a variety of settings. Some of these are review from 6th, 7th, 8th grade, or even earlier, and some of these are going to be new to you. So take notes on the ones that you know you're going to need to maybe review or remember, and of course you can always come back to this PowerPoint at any time. Make sure you pause it whenever you need to get a definition. So literary devices are also sometimes called figures of speech. There's lots of different phrasing that we use, or different words that we use to describe literary devices. Literary devices fall into what's known as diction with writing, and diction basically means word choice. So the use of literary devices all ties into diction. Writers always have a choice when selecting words. You as a writer have choices when you select words. So as a student, or even as a reader, you can analyze why you think an author made the choices that they did. As you get into junior and senior year, we'll be asking you to analyze like why you think an author used that particular literary device or particular figure of speech. Why did the author make the word choice that he or she did? So diction is something that you use in analysis all the time. So figures of speech, literary devices kind of fall within the idea of diction. So, two easy ones to start you off with. Everybody pretty much should know what a simile is. So it's the comparison of two unlike things, and we use like or as within that comparison when it's a simile. So remember, you're comparing two things that are not the same. I was so happy my heavy backpack felt as light as a feather. We use as in this simile, and we're comparing the backpack with a feather, two very unlike things. And the use of similes usually helps the reader connect more with whatever it is the writer is talking about. So an author will use similes to help make a connection for the reader. Now, a metaphor is like a simile in that it compares two unlike objects, but we don't use like or as. So basically, a simile and a metaphor, the exact same thing, except a simile uses like or as. A metaphor does not. So her gloomy attitude reminded me of thorns on a rose. So we're comparing the attitude with thorns, two very unlike things. Now, you could very easily turn this into a simile. Her gloomy attitude was like thorns on a rose. So very similar ideas. Then we have symbols, which we've gone over before. So basically where we have an object, a person, a place, or an action that stands for something larger than itself. I like to think of it as a concrete item that represents something abstract. So a rose represents love. A dove represents peace. The mockingbird represents treating innocent people with respect and not harming an innocent person who has done nothing wrong. So something concrete that represents something abstract. Onomatopoeia, very fun to say, very difficult to spell. So onomatopoeia is a word that imitates a sound. It's our action, comic book kind of sounds. Bang, pow, our animal sounds, meow, woof. So all of those things are onomatopoeia. That should be a review for you. Then we have denotation and connotation, which might be new to you. So denotation is the literal dictionary definition of a word. So I always remember denotation with dictionary, those Ds. And the connotation is the emotion or association that a word or phrase may have. So connotation is where an author might, again, play around with a word and use it in a different way and kind of give the sentence a different feel based on the words that he or she uses. Home is a nice example of where you can look at the denotation of home versus the connotation of home. So the literal dictionary definition of home would be a place of shelter. You know, it's the four walls and it's the roof that makes up your house, basically, the place where you live. Now, the connotation is the associative meaning. It's the emotions that you get with home. I'm hoping that when you think of the connotation of home, you have warm feelings of family, memories in your home. Now, some people might not have a great home life, and so their connotation of the word home is something negative when they hear home. It's a place that they don't necessarily like to be. My hope is, of course, that you have this wonderful feeling about your home. Now, the connotation then for home, different from the denotation. For most of us, home is more than just a place of shelter. There's a lot more going on there because it's where we live. So authors can use connotation to just add some extra depth to a sentence by using particular words. Hyperbole is over-exaggeration. I have a shirt that says hyperbole is the best thing ever. And of course, that's over-exaggeration because while hyperbole is great, not the best thing ever, my backpack weighs a ton. Okay, of course, it does not literally weigh a ton. I'm starving. You are not literally starving. So we see hyperbole in our lives all the time. Pay particular attention in how to pronounce hyperbole. Some people like to say hyperbole, and it is not the Super Bowl of English. Hyperbole is how it's pronounced. So just over exaggeration. It just, of course, adds a little extra oomph to your writing when you put that hyperbole in there. And some people over exaggerate a lot, which, if you think about some characters, have this over exaggeration all the time in their language, and that can help provide some characterization for that particular character. An oxymoron is a figure of speech that combines opposing or contradictory ideas. So we have two words that are put together that mean the exact opposite of each other, and of course that can add some depth to the writing. A freezing fire, jumbo shrimp, numbing pain, minor disaster. So all of these are very opposite ideas that, when combined together, are kind of interesting. Shakespeare uses oxymorons every once in a while in his writing, which we'll always be on the lookout for. Tone is the attitude a writer takes towards his or her subject, the characters, or the readers. It's hard to provide an example for tone, but I think the classic is it was a dark and stormy night, and that helps kind of set the mood for the writings. So think of it as kind of like an emotion. So the writer might have a happy emotion towards what he or she is writing about, or it could be more negative. So any of those emotions, happy, sad, suspenseful, mysterious, all of these things fall in within tone. All right, so the next three go together. They're very similar ideas, but they're executed in different ways, and they all have to do with sounds. Sometimes these we have to actually read out loud to kind of catch them. Now, alliteration, I'm hoping you've heard of before. That's the repetition of similar consonant sounds in a group of words at the beginning of the word. So the beginning is the emphasis for alliteration. Susie sells seashells by the seashore. So tongue twisters are always alliteration. So the repetition of the S sound. Note how I underlined that S so you could see where the alliteration was. I'm going to ask you to do that when I ask you to identify alliteration, because that shows me your understanding. You get that it's consonant sounds at the beginning of words. Remember that consonants are any of the letters that are not vowels. So A, E, I, O, U are vowels, and sometimes Y. And consonants are all the rest of the letters. Now, assonance is where we get into the vowel sounds. So that's the repetition of vowel sounds. And this can be usually within words. It's not usually at the beginning of words like alliteration is. So Stu the cockatoo is new at the zoo. We have the oo sound repeating. Now, note that it's the vowel sound and not necessarily the vowel itself. So sometimes you have to actually read it out loud because the English language is tricky and we get different sounds with different consonants that are put together. So there's the U in stew, the OO in cockatoo makes that oo sound, EW makes an oo sound, and then again, OO repeated, the zoo oo sound. So sometimes we have to read that aloud to actually get the oo sound, to actually hear the vowel sound within a sentence. So when you're actually doing the assessment, you might find yourself kind of whispering a little bit to yourself to kind of get that, to see where the repetition of the vowel sounds is. And I have to give credit that I got this from the Big Bang Theory when Sheldon is looking at children's books on how to make friends. Stu the cockatoo is new at the zoo. I'm such an English geek that when he read the title of that book, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's assonance. And again, authors use alliteration and assonance to help give some feeling, some kind of, I would say, feeling to the line. It just adds a little bit when you have the repetition of those sounds. So we have alliteration, we have assonance, and then we have consonants. Consonants can be tricky because a lot of kids mix it up with alliteration. It's the repetition of consonants close together, usually at the end of words, and I shouldn't say at the end because sometimes it's in the middle of words also. So he held a broad view of the world. The repetition of that D sound at the end, held, broad, and world. And often consonants can actually be in the middle of words too. So maybe you have like a SH or a TH sound, or a ch, like a CH sound that's repeated throughout a line. And usually it's in a line of, like, say, poetry, or in a sentence, or it can be within, like, say, 2 lines together or 3 lines of, like, say, poetry together where you see consonants. Alliteration is always at the beginning of words. Consonants is where we might have like one or two at the beginning of the word, in the middle of the word, and the end of the word. So there's a mix when we have consonants. And then I just note here that consonants, assonants, and alliteration, I'm going to ask you to underline or circle the consonant or vowel sounds that shows your understanding of those literary devices. And again, just something to kind of be aware of as you're reading poetry. And even when you're looking at short stories, I have my seniors looking for it in nonfiction. All of these appear in any kind of writing. Personification should be a repeat, so a figure of speech in which an animal, an object, or an idea is given human characteristics or personality traits. So my example, the tree glowered over us. Glowering is a very human trait, and giving it to a tree is personification. An allusion, we've talked about allusions a little bit, so it's an unexplained reference to a famous person, a place, an event, or literary work. We can have biblical allusions, we can have historical allusions, we can have allusions to other pieces of literature, and it's unexplained. The author makes a reference to something that you may or may not know, and if you understand it, it adds a little depth to the reading, but if you don't, it's not anything that if you miss an allusion that it's necessarily a bad thing. But as you get older and you become more well-read and more educated, you'll pick up more and more allusions in writing. So one that we see in To Kill a Mockingbird is from the very beginning in the exposition, but it was a time of vague optimism for some of the people. Macomb County had recently been told that it had nothing to fear but fear, that should be but fear itself. And that's a reference to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's inaugural speech. He says, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself. It's time to get out of this depression." It helps set the time period. If you catch that allusion, you know, oh, okay, we're in the 1930s in this book. And so Lee is able to use that allusion to set the time period without actually having to come out and say, it's 1932. Allusions help authors, again, just add a little bit of depth to their writing that just adds more for the reader to grab onto. Imagery is language that appeals to any of the sense or senses. Please note that most often in poetry or even in fiction writing, there's usually lots of visual imagery trying to create the setting for you. So the author can be painting the setting in your mind. But we can also see imagery with any of the other senses. We can get smells, we can get taste with food, actually what something feels like or what something sounds like. So all of the senses play into imagery, but we most often see visual imagery. And then rhyme scheme. I'm hoping that you've covered rhyme scheme in the past, but just in case you haven't, we want to indicate the rhyme scheme with different letters of the alphabet for each new rhyme. So we're looking for the things that rhyme. So here we have, I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. So I start basically, it's all about end rhymes. So the words at the end of the lines, how those rhyme together. It's called end rhyme. So I have cloud, so I give that an A. Then I have hills. Hills doesn't rhyme with cloud, so I give it a B. Then I have crowd, and I go crowd, cloud. All right, that rhymes, so I give it an A. Then daffodils. Daffodils doesn't rhyme with cloud. Daffodils does rhyme with hills. Daffodils, hills, so I give it a B, so it matches up there. Then I have trees. Doesn't rhyme with cloud, doesn't rhyme with hills, so I give it a C. And then breeze rhymes with tree, so I give it a C. And we write out rhyme scheme in a line using capital letters. So this case it's A, B, A, B, C, C. And we put spaces to show a separation between stanzas. So if this poem had, and it does, a second stanza, I would want to look to see, does the rhyme scheme match? Is it A, B, A, B, C, C? Or does it start over in some kind of new type of rhyme scheme? Maybe it's A, B, A, B, A, B, or A, A, B, B, C, C. So we're always looking to see what the rhyme scheme is. And then meter. So meter is tricky. I'm going to introduce it to you now so you have it in your heads. We're not going to go into too much detail with meter freshman year, but it's something that will come back in later years. So I just want to have a little introduction for you now. Meter is basically a unit of rhythm in poetry. It's the pattern of the beats. Sometimes meter is also called a foot. Each foot has a certain number of syllables in it, usually 2 or 3 syllables. It doesn't get much longer than that because that gets to be a little crazy. The difference in types of of meter is which syllables are accented and which ones are not. So we naturally put accents on different syllables of words when we're talking. The most common one for us this year is going to be iambic pentameter with Shakespeare. So iambic pentameter is a line of poetry with 6 iambic feet, thus the penta, 5. An iambic foot consists of 2 syllables, one weak syllable followed by a strong stressed syllable. So with meter, we tend to count it out. So this is Shakespeare. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? So we look at the rhythm. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? So we look to see where the stress is. Meter is very difficult for me because I feel like I could put the stress on any kind of any syllable. So it's hard for me to often see. So basically I try to look for unstressed versus stressed. And we tend to go unstressed and then stressed. So the bolded words or syllables there are the stressed syllables. We'll hit it a little bit harder with Shakespeare, but I just want you to be aware of the fact that there is a little bit of rhythm to some poetry. And then some poetry is considered to be blank verse or free verse, where there's no rhyme scheme going on, there's no meter going on. It's a little bit more like prose when we have free verse or blank verse poetry. So these are just a lot of literary devices that you're going to come in contact with throughout high school, and I'll be asking you to have a strong understanding of these literary devices as you look at poetry, as we look at Romeo and Juliet, and later as we're reading fiction. Thanks a lot.